102.5 FM. Good morning to you. It is Wednesday, June 15th, 2016. This is Council Conversations, an outreach of the City of Jonesboro and KLEK 102.5 FM. This interview will air on Channel 24 for the City of Jonesboro. Council Conversations is a show in which we talk to members of the Jonesboro City Council, and we have one of the members of the Jonesboro City Council with us today. We have Reverend Dr. Charles Coleman in the studio with us, and we are so grateful to have Dr. Coleman in the studio with us today. How are you doing today, Dr. Coleman?
Doing absolutely great.
All right, Dr. Coleman, just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, what ward you represent, how long you've lived in Jonesboro, and what do you do when you're not taking care of city council business?
I'm Ward 2, Position 1. I've been in Jonesboro going on 25 years. I retired from Arkansas State University. I was the Director of Technology there. Presently, I have several, things that I do in the community. I own home drafting services, which I do house plans, been doing house plans for 40 years. I'm on several boards in the community, and we have community gardens, and that takes up quite a bit of my time.
All right. Now, when and why did you first decide to run for the city council?
Personally, I didn't decide. I had people to decide for me, and I just went on and followed through. First election, I won by 61%. The second term, I was unopposed. I have some goals, and I'm still not satisfied with some of the things that I would like to have done in Jonesboro.
Okay, so you mentioned that you have some goals. So, Dr. Coleman, what are some of those goals that you have?
Well, number one, I think that I've been fighting to, even though I'm in Ward 2, Position 1, when you get elected as a council for the city, you actually are subject to the whole city, not just your ward. And most of the constituents that call me preferably are trying to get roads widened, trying to get a right turn lane just like they do on the south part of Jonesboro, which should not have happened yet. That's kind of frustrating that we can come up sometime. I say we because I'm still a council person. Come up money to have right turn signals or turn lanes in Jonesboro, but we don't have many on the north side. The second part of that, I've been trying for at least 3.5 years to get Patrick widened, North Patrick, and also Patrick and Washington. You can't hardly drive down those streets, particularly North Patrick, where children are walking out in the middle of the street. I've had several people, well, matter of fact, at least every 2 or 3 months, somebody's calling me talking about the speed, the traffic on Patrick, and I keep hearing that we're going to widen and we're going to do an overpass, but it seems like nothing's happening. It seems like everything is tied to grants, and that's kind of frustrating.
All right. Now, Dr. Coleman, at the beginning of that question, you mentioned that you are elected by the entire city, although you represent Ward 2, the citizens in Ward 2. Are you in favor of the system as it is where the entire city elects a ward, or do you think things would be better off if it was each ward elected its own representative, or a possible mixture of both where one position is citywide and one position is elected by the ward members?
I've always actually been against the system that we've had. I think that a representative could actually do a whole lot more if they were representing that particular ward. They could spend more of their time trying to facilitate things that actually happen pertinent to that particular area. But when you're dealing with the city, which I don't particularly object to it, but I just think that if you had a ward position, that you could give more back to the community. You could actually do a little bit more of what the community want rather than a citywide situation. And when you're dealing with citywide, you're subject to all the other councilmen, but at the same time, even if you were a ward, you were subject to council, but it'd be a little bit more extensive. You could do a little bit more personal things. Again, I could concentrate a little bit more on the items at hand rather than the total item within Jonesboro.
All right, phone lines are open at 870-277-1080 if you have a question for Reverend Dr. Charles Coleman. He is the alderman for Ward 2, Position 1. Once again, that phone number is 870-277-1080. Now, Dr. Coleman, what accomplishments has the city made in recent years that you are most proud of?
Well, I'm looking at the whole city as a whole. We have actually expanded a lot of our cleanup programs. If there's any accomplishment, I'm the type of person I like to call names. A lot of people are scared to call names. But there's one particular gentleman, and two really, the city engineer, Steve Tippett. I guarantee you, particularly during this flood situation, if those two persons that we didn't have in the city, we would have been pretty bad off. I mean, it was pretty bad off anyway with the flooding. But I think the accomplishment of the growth of the city, the housing area, the business area, the expansion of the business in Jonesboro, and even some of the housing. But that's just, I guess, part of the growth of Jonesboro. So I'm proud of that, but I think there's a whole lot more that can be done.
All right, you mentioned, you named a gentleman that was involved with helping with the flood effort. So, Dr. Coleman, let's talk about drainage issues and the city's long-range plans to address flooding. What can you say about that?
Well, I think that Jonesboro as a whole, I think the reconstruction, and maybe not all, the reconstruction of some of the pipelines, because when you get reduced piping going to small areas, which are actually called backup, when the cleanup of some of the ditches and draining areas is not done on a more rotation basis. I think they do them on a rotation basis, but not enough. And I think that's the reason we don't have enough employees that actually do that. But I think that some of the piping in Jonesboro need to be expanded. I think that would really help some of the issues. I think the drainage system needs to have different outflows. And I think that would help the position also.
And that's probably something that you know something about, since you say you do drafting. Do you?
Well, I'm an engineer technician by trade, and sometimes I have to be careful with that because people try to put me in an engineer's bracket. An engineer technician is mostly an engineer's helper, even though I worked as an engineer technician and partly engineer for 14 years, way before I started teaching. And I taught for 30 years, so that's a lot of years. And I worked in civil engineering firms, so I hope to know a little bit more about it than I'm asked about. So when certain things happen, some things I'm not surprised, and I know that, let's take, for instance, 141, that area. I think the piping in that area just need to be totally redone. And I think that there need to be appropriated money to do that. But at the same time, let's take the whole of Jonesboro. Most of the housing that's going up, most of the building that's going up, I think the city needs to do a little bit more of addressing what type of lines are connected to these districts, what type of lines are connected to these new housing, new residents, these type of things. I don't think there's enough time spent in actually researching where the lines are, or asking the industrial people that's building these apartment complexes, or I guess tracts of land, are they really using the type of pipes that are actually needed to keep the housing from flooding? When you're dealing with swales on people's property, which is the term that they use in engineering, where is the water really going to flow? Or they just want to just put up a new structure just to look good?
Yes, sir. Okay, and my next question, and this also is going to tie into another issue that has gotten a lot of attention, police salaries. But you mentioned earlier that one of the problems, at least in regards to the drainage situation, is that a lot of things can only happen if there are grants available. I'm assuming that there's not any other monies available. And of course, that kind of also ties into the issue of police salaries. You know, there was a couple months back the protest by the officers that were protesting their pay. So what do you think the solution is going to be to get funds for things such as police salaries, drainage, and other issues?
Well, let me answer that in two parts. One of the drainage, if you just depend on grants, that really bothers me. We ought to have some kind of appropriated money or set aside money, particularly for that particular item, period. That way you could keep up. That's number one. Number two, I've always been for a raise for the police officer. 25 years ago when I first moved here, for some reason I noticed that we didn't have enough officers, number one. We don't have enough officers really trained. I'm not saying that the training that they have is obsolete training, but I just think there need to be more psychological training for the police officers. But at the same time, I think that the raises comparably to other places, we just have not done a good job of paying our officers. And I feel that in the next 10, maybe less than that, 5 years, we're going to have more problems than we think if we don't do something about this blight.
So what do you think would the solution be to come up with the funds? You say you feel more funds to be appropriated, but where do you feel these funds will have to come from?
Well, they tried to pass a new tax not too long ago. Personally, I think that we need another tax, maybe not as much as was appropriate from the old tax that they were trying to get passed, but you cannot do things without money. And with the federal government backing off of grants, backing off of appropriating funds, you can't depend on the federal government all the time. So if you don't have some type, and I know this is hard for people to think about taxes, but you're going to have some kind of tax base, set aside monies for different venues. Again, redundantly speaking, you're going to have some type of money set aside or some portion of that tax primarily for what? Rebuilding pipelines. You're going to have set aside money primarily for the police department or the fire department, those venues that we really need in Jonesboro, because you're not going to be able to really grow with these particular items not taken care of, especially when you have a city that's growing like Jonesboro. And with the crime rate, we have most of our crime, by the way, is mostly people from the outside coming in, but at the same time, whether they're coming in or going out, it doesn't really matter. You need officers that are rail trained. You need officers that be satisfied to take a paycheck home, because they got families too, just like everybody else.
Yes, sir. We're speaking with Reverend Dr. Charles Coleman. He is the alderman for Ward 2, Position 1. If you have a question for Dr. Coleman, the phone number is 870-277-1080. Once again, that phone number is 870-277-1080. Dr. Coleman, what are some other issues that you are concerned about in the city? And we have a call, so we will go to the phones. Kaylee K, who's this?
Good morning, Dr. Coleman. Well, I do want to say I appreciate you serving our Ward 2 and what you've done and what you continue to do for us. And I totally agree with you that I do believe that the person that's serving the ward needs to be living kind of in the ward or know something about it instead of citywide election. First question I have to ask you, probably the only one. I have a passion for the park in Reverend Wells Park because I do live in North Jonesboro and played in that park as a kid. We have been asking and wanting some kind of pedestrian crosswalk, like they had at Parker Park for kids, because they play at that park and it's a lot of kids in the neighborhood. And we keep getting the answers that this part of the main street belongs to the highway department. So I'm going to hang up and let you answer that for me.
We thank you for the question, Mrs. Farrell.
Thank you.
That's not a hard question to answer, tell the truth about it, because that highway does belong to the highway department, period. But at the same time, let's go back to something I talked about a few minutes ago, grants. If you depend on grants to do everything that you want done for the parks is concerned, we're not going to be able to keep up. We're not going to be able to do anything at Allen Park. We're not going to Reverend Willis Park, Parker Park. If you keep depending on grants, if there's not money set aside, particularly for these areas, to do those things, then I guarantee you it's going to take a long time.
Yes, sir. Okay, getting back to what I asked before we had the phone call, what are some other issues that are going on in the city of Jonesboro that you are concerned about?
Well, I've been trying, I was told almost 6 years ago that I would be able to be introduced to somebody at Walmart's so that we can possibly get a Walmart's on the north side. I was also told that there's a possibility of banks, there's a possibility of more food venues, there's a possibility of more hardware stores be put on the north side. Particularly, we have growth on the north side just like we have on all parts of Jonesboro. And when you get ready to buy a tool or lumber or whatever, and I fall into that predicament sometimes myself trying to build, then you have to go always across town to do that. And these things need to, Jonesboro is growing, but it seems like everything is going on 49, everything is going south of Jonesboro, but we don't have those type venues on the north side to help employment. Because anytime you put up a new building, put up a new venue, whether it's cooking, whether it's banking, whether it's facilities for hardware, then you're going to help employment at the same time. And those things are really my top priorities. I've already talked to some bankers. Haven't been able to talk to anybody from Walmart's, and at the same time, somebody from the hardware production. But those type of venues, I have to admit that Barry Wright, I think that's his name, Barry. I knew his first name is Barry. I thought when he had the workings of the food giant and the Bill's Grocery on the corner of Johnson and Main, I thought that was one of the great things would open up the gate to 141, that some other industry would come in. And I'm still hoping that they would kind of follow his lead and invest some money to do some things that we need to have on the north side of Jonesboro.
Okay, so piggybacking off that question, what else do you think Jonesboro needs to continue to grow, not just, as you said, on the south side and on 49, but in North Jonesboro and all over Jonesboro?
Well, we need more young folk to come to city council. We need more voices to be heard. You know, most of us on the council are in my age bracket, and I'm still looking for young folk to lead this community. And we need more minds. We don't need just certain minds. We need all minds to do concentration on how we're going to grow as a unit in this city. And when I say the unit, I mean all cultures, all ethnicity backgrounds. But we need that type of atmosphere where it's not just, say, one horse deal or one man's thinking or one lady's thinking. We need this type of production from the young folks to tell us what they really want. But be sincere, but tell us what you want and not being active with that. That's the thing that's detrimental. When you can tell people all day what you want to do, but if you don't get involved, and I think that getting young people involved, hearing what they have to say, hearing how they want some things done. We have these forums around the city. I don't think enough young people show up to tell us what they really want, because we don't have enough, as far as I'm concerned, we don't have enough items, enough places for the young people in Jonesboro.
All right, and I would certainly agree with that. And like Dr. Coleman says, if you are concerned and make your voice known, call City Hall and let the councilman, let the mayor, let everyone know what you want and how you feel so that this could be a better community for you. Dr. Coleman, my last question for you today, and we want to once again thank you for coming, is where do you see us as a city in 10 years?
In 10 years, the other prediction I made when I first moved here, right now we have, statistically it says that we have 75,000 people. In 10 years, you're going to have 150,000 people sitting in Jonesboro. That is a problem for me. That's why I back the police a lot. That's why, whether I'm on the council or not on the council, I'm always back the police and back the fire department, because those two entities is going to encapsulate the growth that we have in Jonesboro.
Yes, sir, and I certainly agree with you. We have been speaking with Reverend Dr. Charles Coleman, Alderman for Ward 2, Position 1. Dr. Coleman, we want to thank you for stopping by the studio. You're certainly welcome to come back anytime. This has been Council Conversations, an outreach of the City of Jonesboro and KLEK 102.5 FM.